The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of Kensington Palace as James Mitchell, a veteran security guard with 30 years of service to the royal family, made his routine late-night patrol. It was a cold December evening in 2023, exactly 26 years after Princess Diana's tragic death in Paris. The palace, once filled with her laughter and warmth, now stood as a monument to memories that seemed frozen in time. As James approached the sealed wing that had once been Diana's private quarters, he noticed something unusual. A faint draft was coming from beneath the door of her former study, a room that had been untouched since her passing. The brass nameplate still bore her title, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales. His master key turned with a soft click, and as he pushed open the heavy oak door, the beam of his flashlight revealed something that would send shockwaves through the British monarchy and change the course of royal succession forever. Hidden behind a loose panel in an antique writing desk, wrapped in Diana's personal stationery, and sealed with her private wax seal, lay a document that royal historians had theorized about, but never proven to exist. The parchment, yellowed with age and bearing the unmistakable handwriting of the people's princess, contained revelations that would challenge everything the world thought it knew about Prince William's destiny and the future of the British crown. This is the story of how one man's discovery of a forgotten will would unravel decades of royal protocol, expose hidden truths about Diana's final wishes, and set in motion a constitutional crisis that would test the very foundations of the modern monarchy. What James Mitchell found that night was not just a piece of paper, but a key to understanding Diana's deepest fears about her son's futures and her desperate attempt to protect them from forces within the palace walls that she had come to distrust. The lost will of Princess Diana was about to rewrite history. James Mitchell had seen many things during his 3 decades of service at Kensington Palace, but nothing had prepared him for what he discovered on that frigid December night in 2023. As he stood in Princess Diana's former study, holding the mysterious document in his trembling hands, he realized that his life was about to change forever. The document was immediately recognizable as Diana's handwriting. James had seen enough of her personal correspondence during his years of service to know the distinctive loops and curves of her pen. The date at the top made his blood run cold. August 15th, 1997, just 2 weeks before her death in Paris. This was not her official will, which had been read publicly and settled years ago. This was something else entirely, something that had been hidden away with the kind of secrecy that only someone fearing for their life would employ. James carefully unfolded the papers, his security training telling him to document everything while his human instincts urged him to read every word immediately. The document was titled Private Provisions for My Beloved Sons and was written in Diana's careful script. As he read the opening lines, James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold seeping through the palace windows. The document began with Diana expressing her growing concerns about threats to her safety and her son's well-being. She wrote of conversations she had overheard, meetings she had not been invited to, and a growing sense that powerful forces within the establishment were working against her. Most shocking of all were her specific concerns about Prince William's future role as king and her belief that he was not prepared for the manipulations and dangers that would face him. According to the document, Diana had secretly arranged for alternative provisions for both her sons' futures. She had established a trust fund outside the traditional royal channels, worked with international lawyers to create legal safeguards, and most surprisingly, had documentation that called into question certain aspects of the line of succession itself. The implications were staggering and potentially constitutional in their significance. James realized that he was holding information that could destabilize the monarchy. Diana had apparently discovered something about the royal family's internal workings that had frightened her enough to take extraordinary measures to protect her children. The document referenced conversations with unnamed sources within the palace, intelligence she had gathered about threats to her safety, and her growing belief that traditional royal protocols would not be sufficient to protect William and Harry for what she saw as a corrupted system. As James continued reading, he discovered that Diana had not acted alone. The document mentioned trusted advisors, international legal experts, and even foreign dignitaries who had helped her create what she called insurance policies for her son's protection. She had apparently been building a network of support outside the traditional royal establishment, people who shared her concerns about the direction the monarchy was heading. The security guard knew that he faced an impossible choice. Protocol demanded that he immediately report his discovery to his superiors, who would undoubtedly pass the information up the chain of command until it reached the highest levels of the royal household. But something about Diana's words, her obvious fear and desperation, made him hesitate. She had written about her distrust of the very people who would now be deciding what to do with her final wishes. James spent the rest of his shift in Diana's former study, carefully reading and rereading the document, trying to understand its full implications. Diana had written about specific individuals within the royal household whom she suspected of working against her interests. Some of these people were still alive and still held positions of influence within the palace structure. The document also contained references to bank accounts, legal documents, and safety deposit boxes in various countries, suggesting that Diana's contingency plans were far more extensive than anyone had imagined. As dawn broke over London, James made a decision that would change everything. Rather than following standard protocol, he carefully photographed every page of the document with his personal phone, then returned the original to its hiding place behind the loose panel in Diana's desk. He needed time to think, to research, and to understand exactly what he had discovered before deciding who, if anyone, should be told about it. The implications of the document were enormous. If Diana's concerns about threats to her safety were valid, if her suspicions about corruption within the royal establishment were based on real evidence, then her death might not have been the simple traffic accident that the world had been told it was. More immediately concerning was what the document suggested about Prince William's future and the constitutional crisis that might ensue if Diana's alternative arrangements were ever made public. James left the palace that morning knowing that his quiet life as a security guard was over. He was now the keeper of a secret that could reshape the British monarchy, and he had no idea who he could trust with the information. Diana's document had made it clear that she believed the traditional channels of royal communication had been compromised. If she was right, then going through official channels might be exactly the wrong thing to do. Over the following days, James began his own careful investigation into the claims made in Diana's document. Using his access to palace records and his relationships with other long-serving staff members, he started to piece together a picture of the events leading up to Diana's death. What he discovered only deepened the mystery and strengthened his belief that the document was genuine and its contents were as explosive as they appear to be. The Lost Will of Princess Diana was not just a historical curiosity. It was a roadmap to understanding the hidden forces that had shaped the royal family for decades, and potentially a guide to protecting Prince William from the same dangers that Diana believed had ultimately cost her own life. James Mitchell, a simple security guard who had devoted his career to protecting the royal family, now found himself holding the key to their most dangerous secret. As he prepared to delve deeper into Diana's claims, James knew that there would be no turning back. The discovery of the lost will had set events in motion that would either vindicate Diana's fears or destroy everything he had spent his life protecting. Either way, the British monarchy would never be the same again. 3 weeks after discovering Diana's hidden document, James Mitchell had transformed from a loyal palace employee into a determined investigator uncovering secrets that the royal establishment had kept buried for decades. His careful research into the claims made in Diana's will had revealed a pattern of events that painted a disturbing picture of the months leading up to her death. Working methodically through palace archives and staff records, James had identified several of the individuals Diana had mentioned by name in her document. Most troubling was his discovery that 2 of these people had been present at crucial meetings in the weeks before Diana's fatal trip to Paris. These meetings, according to Diana's notes, had concerned discussions about limiting her public role and restricting her access to her sons. The fact that she had documented these conversations in such detail suggested that she had been preparing for something, building a case that she hoped would protect William and Harry from forces she could not directly confront. James had also begun reaching out to former palace employees who had worked closely with Diana during her final months. Their testimonies, given reluctantly and often in hushed tones over coffee in London cafes far from royal circles, painted a picture of a princess who had become increasingly isolated and fearful. Margaret Thornton, Diana's former private secretary, recalled how the princess had started keeping multiple copies of important documents and had begun insisting on witnesses for conversations that she had previously conducted privately. The most significant breakthrough came when James contacted Robert Harrison, Diana's former driver, who had left royal service shortly after her death and now lived quietly in Scotland. Robert revealed that in the weeks before Paris, Diana had asked him to make several mysterious trips to banks and legal offices around London. She had been accompanied on these trips by a woman Robert had never seen before, someone Diana had introduced only as a friend who helps with legal matters. This mysterious legal advisor was mentioned prominently in Diana's hidden document as someone who had helped her establish what she called external protections for her sons. According to Diana's notes, this woman was an international lawyer with expertise in constitutional law and royal succession issues. She had apparently helped Diana understand legal precedents that could be used to challenge traditional royal protocols if circumstances required it. James's investigation led him to discover that Diana had been far more sophisticated in her understanding of royal law than anyone had realized. The hidden document contained references to historical cases where royal succession had been altered or challenged, legal mechanisms that could be used to protect her sons from what she saw as a corrupt system, and even contingency plans for removing them from the line of succession entirely if their safety required it. The most shocking revelation came when James found records of Diana's secret meetings with representatives from several Commonwealth countries. These meetings, which had not been officially recorded or acknowledged, had apparently focused on discussions about alternative arrangements for her sons' futures outside the traditional British royal structure. Diana had been exploring the possibility of her children renouncing their British titles and accepting positions within other royal houses or constitutional monarchies where they would be safer from what she saw as British establishment corruption. As James delved deeper into these revelations, he began to understand the true scope of Diana's fears and the lengths to which she had gone to protect her children. The hidden will was not just a document expressing a mother's concerns. It was the centerpiece of an elaborate backup plan that Diana had spent months developing with the help of international legal experts, friendly foreign governments, and trusted advisors outside the traditional royal circle. The document also contained specific instructions for how and when these alternative arrangements should be activated. Diana had created what amounted to a constitutional emergency plan that could be triggered if her sons faced the same threats that she believed were endangering her own life. The triggers were specific and detailed: threats to their physical safety, attempts to manipulate their education or upbringing, efforts to force them into marriages or roles they did not want, or evidence that the traditional royal system was becoming irreparably corrupt. James realized that some of these triggers might already have been activated. Prince William's highly publicized struggles with the pressures of royal life, his well-documented concerns about the media attention focused on his family, and his efforts to modernize royal protocols all echoed the concerns that Diana had expressed in her document. The question was whether William knew about his mother's backup plans and whether circumstances had reached the point where they should be implemented. The investigation also revealed that Diana had not been paranoid or delusional in her fears. James found evidence of surveillance activities directed at the princess, unauthorized access to her personal communications, and coordinated efforts to limit her public influence during her final months. The people she had suspected of working against her had indeed been documenting her activities and reporting on her movements in ways that went far beyond normal royal security protocols. Most disturbing was James's discovery that some of these same surveillance and control mechanisms were still in place and were potentially being used to monitor Prince William and his family. Diana's fears about ongoing threats to her sons appeared to have been well-founded, and her backup plans might be the only protection they had against forces that continued to operate within the royal establishment. As James compiled his evidence, he faced the growing realization that Diana's death might not have been the accident that the world had been told it was. The pattern of surveillance, the efforts to isolate and control her, the mysterious meetings and unexplained phone calls in the weeks before Paris all suggested a level of organized opposition to the princess that could have escalated beyond mere political maneuvering. The Hidden will contain Diana's own assessment of these threats, written in language that suggested she feared for her life but was trying to protect her sons from bearing the burden of that knowledge. She had written about feeling hunted and about her belief that traditional protections were no longer adequate to ensure her safety or that of her children. The document read like the testimony of someone who knew she was in danger, but was trying to create safeguards that would outlive her. James knew that he was approaching a point of no return in his investigation. The evidence he had gathered painted a picture of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the royal establishment and potentially extended to Diana's death itself. The Lost Will was not just a historical curiosity. It was a roadmap to understanding a cover-up that had lasted for decades and was potentially still ongoing. The question now was what to do with this information. Diana's document had made it clear that she did not trust the traditional royal channels to protect her sons. If she was right, then going to palace authorities with this evidence might put both James and Prince William in danger. But if the backup plans Diana had created were genuinely needed to protect the future king, then keeping them secret might be an even greater betrayal of her trust. As James prepared to take the next step in his investigation, he knew that he was no longer just a palace security guard who had stumbled upon an old document. He had become the guardian of Princess Diana's most important secret and potentially the only person who could ensure that her final wishes were carried out. The Lost Will was about to test not just his loyalty to the royal family, but his understanding of what that loyalty truly meant. James Mitchell's world changed forever on a rainy Thursday morning in January 2024, when he received an unexpected phone call that would force him to confront the full implications of his discovery. The caller identified herself as Dr. Sarah Chun, an international constitutional lawyer based in Geneva, and she knew about the hidden document. Dr. Chen's call came just as James was preparing to make contact with Prince William directly, having exhausted all other options for safely sharing Diana's revelations. The lawyer's knowledge of the document's existence confirmed James's growing suspicion that Diana's backup plans had been far more extensive and sophisticated than he had initially realized. Dr. Chun explained that she had been waiting for over 25 years for someone to discover the document and activate the contingency protocols that Diana had established. According to Dr. Chun, she had been the mysterious legal advisor mentioned in Diana's notes, the woman who had helped the princess understand the constitutional mechanisms that could be used to protect her sons. Diana had engaged her services through a complex network of intermediaries, ensuring that their relationship could not be easily traced by anyone monitoring the princess's activities. Dr. Chen had helped Diana establish legal frameworks in several countries that could provide alternative options for William and Harry if the British royal system proved too dangerous or corrupt for them to navigate safely. The lawyer revealed that Diana's death had activated the first phase of the contingency plans automatically. Sealed documents have been filed with courts in multiple countries. Trust funds have been established under international law, and a network of legal guardians have been put in place to monitor the prince's well-being from a distance. For over 2 decades, this shadow support system had been operating quietly, ready to intervene if specific triggers outlined in Diana's will were activated. Dr. Chun informed James that several of those triggers had now been met. Prince William's public statements about his struggles with royal protocol, his efforts to modernize the monarchy, and his documented concerns about media intrusion had all been flagged by the monitoring system that Diana had established. Most significantly, recent intelligence gathered by the international legal team suggested that some of the same forces that had threatened Diana were now focusing their attention on William and his family. The lawyer arranged to meet James in London, at a small hotel in Bloomsbury chosen specifically because it had no connections to royal circles or government agencies. When they met, Dr. Chun presented James with evidence that Diana's fears had been well-founded and that the threats she had identified were still active. She showed him surveillance reports, communication intercepts, and financial records that painted a picture of ongoing efforts to monitor and potentially manipulate the royal family. Most disturbing was Dr. Chen's revelation that Diana's death had not ended the surveillance and harassment that the princess had documented. Instead, these activities had shifted focus to her sons, with particular attention being paid to Prince William as he approached his role as future king. The monitoring had intensified in recent years as William had begun to assert more independence from traditional royal protocols and had started making public statements that challenged established royal practices. Dr. Chun explained that Diana had anticipated this development and had created specific protections for her sons that could be activated if they were ever subjected to the same treatment that had ultimately cost her life. These protections included legal mechanisms for removing them from the British line of succession, alternative arrangements for their security and financial support, and even contingency plans for relocating them to friendly countries if their safety in Britain became compromised. The lawyer also revealed that Diana had recorded video testimonies explaining her concerns and detailing the evidence she had gathered about threats to her safety. These recordings had been stored in secure locations around the world and could be released if circumstances required public disclosure of the information. Diana had essentially created a dead man's switch that would expose the truth about her situation if anything happened to her or if her sons faced similar dangers. James learned that he was not the first person to discover evidence of Diana's backup plans. Over the years, several individuals had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, but most have been discouraged from pursuing their investigations through various forms of pressure or intimidation. Dr. Chun showed him documentation of these cases, including records of mysterious job transfers, sudden financial problems, and even physical threats directed at people who had gotten too close to the truth. The lawyer made it clear that James was now in a similar position of danger. His investigation into Diana's document had not gone unnoticed, and there were already signs that the same forces that had monitored the princess were beginning to take an interest in his activities. Dr. Chin warned that continuing his investigation would put him at serious risk, but she also emphasized that failing to act could leave Prince William vulnerable to the same fate that had befallen his mother. According to Dr. Chun, the time had come to fully activate Diana's contingency plans. The evidence suggested that Prince William was facing increasing pressure to conform to traditional royal protocols that Diana had believed were designed to control and manipulate future monarchs. The prince's recent public statements about wanting to modernize the monarchy and his documented concerns about the impact of royal life on his family echoed the same fears that Diana had expressed in her final months. The lawyer proposed a carefully coordinated plan to inform Prince William about his mother's backup arrangements while ensuring his safety and that of his family. This would involve activating the international legal protections that Diana had established, securing access to the financial resources she had set aside, and potentially implementing some of the alternative security arrangements that had been prepared decades earlier. Dr. Chen also revealed that Diana's planning had included provisions for public disclosure if circumstances required it. The princess had understood that protecting her sons might ultimately require exposing the truth about the forces that had threatened her, even if doing so would create a constitutional crisis. She had prepared detailed evidence of surveillance activities, documented threats, and records of attempts to manipulate royal protocols for political purposes. The lawyer emphasized that implementing Diana's plans would not necessarily mean removing William from the line of succession or ending the monarchy. Instead, it would provide him with alternatives and protections that would allow him to serve as king on his own terms, free from the manipulation and control that had characterized the royal establishment during his mother's lifetime. Diana had envisioned a reformed monarchy that could serve the British people without being subservient to hidden political and financial interests. James found himself at the center of a decision that could reshape the British constitutional system. Diana's Lost Will was not just a historical document. It was a comprehensive plan for protecting the future of the monarchy from the corruption that the princess believed had infiltrated its highest levels. The question now was whether James had the courage to help activate these protections and whether Prince William was prepared to learn the truth about his mother's final efforts to safeguard his future. As James left his meeting with Dr. Chun, he carried with him encrypted communications equipment, contact information for the international legal team, and detailed instructions for beginning the process of activating Diana's contingency plans. He also carried the heavy burden of knowing that his next actions could either save the monarchy or destroy it, and that Princess Diana's legacy would ultimately depend on choices he was about to make. The Lost Will had revealed itself to be far more than a document hidden in a palace wall. It was the key to a shadow system of protection and legal safeguards that had been waiting for over 25 years to fulfill a dying mother's promise to protect her children from the forces that had ultimately cost her own life. The confrontation that James Mitchell had been dreading finally came on a cold February morning when he was summoned to an emergency meeting with palace security chiefs. Word of his unusual research activities and his meeting with Dr. Chun had somehow reached the highest levels of royal administration, confirming his worst fears about ongoing surveillance within the palace walls. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, the head of royal security, sat across from James in a windowless conference room deep within Buckingham Palace. The man's steel-gray eyes and military bearing made it clear that this was not going to be a routine disciplinary meeting. Pemberton had served the royal family for over 40 years and had been in his position during the final months of Diana's life. According to Diana's hidden document, he was one of the individuals she had suspected of working against her interests. Pemberton began the meeting by acknowledging that palace security had been monitoring James's activities since his discovery of the document in Diana's former study. The surveillance had included tracking his movements, monitoring his communications, and investigating his contact with Dr. Chun and other individuals connected to Diana's backup plans. The security chief made it clear that the palace viewed James's actions as a serious security breach that threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. However, what Pemberton said next surprised James and confirmed many of Diana's worst fears. The security chief admitted that the palace had always known about the existence of Diana's contingency plans and had been actively working to suppress them for over 25 years. The surveillance and control measures that Diana had documented were not paranoid delusions, but accurate observations of a systematic effort to monitor and manipulate the royal family for what Pemberton claimed were reasons of national security. According to Pemberton, Diana had become a threat to the stability of the British constitutional system during her final months. Her growing independence, her relationships with foreign political figures, and her plans to expose what she saw as corruption within the royal establishment had been viewed by security services as potentially destabilizing to the monarchy and to Britain's international relationships. The measures taken against her had been authorized at the highest levels of government and had been implemented to protect the institution of the monarchy from what was seen as the princess's increasingly erratic behavior. Pemberton revealed that Diana's death, while officially ruled an accident, had been convenient for those who were struggling to contain her influence. He stopped short of directly implicating the security services in her death, but his words carried clear implications about the lengths to which the establishment would go to protect what they saw as vital national interests. The message was unmistakable. Those who threatened the stability of the system faced serious consequences. The security chief then made James an offer that was clearly both a bribe and a threat. The palace would provide him with a substantial financial settlement and early retirement if he agreed to forget about Diana's document and cease all contact with Dr. Chun and her legal team. In exchange for his silence, James would be set up with a comfortable life far from London and far from royal circles. The alternative, Pemberton made clear, would be prosecution for theft of royal property, violation of security protocols, and potentially charges under the Official Secrets Act. James found himself facing the same choice that had confronted Princess Diana: submit to the control of the establishment or face the consequences of resistance. The difference was that James now had the benefit of Diana's preparations and the support of the international legal team that she had assembled. As he sat listening to Pemberton's threats and promises, James activated a recording device that Dr. Chun had provided him, capturing evidence of the palace's acknowledgement of their surveillance and suppression activities. The meeting took a dramatic turn when James revealed that he was not acting alone and that Diana's contingency plans were already being activated. He informed Pemberton that international legal proceedings had been initiated, that evidence of the palace's surveillance activities was being compiled by courts in multiple countries, and that the suppression of Diana's was being investigated as a potential violation of international law. Pemberton's composure cracked as James explained that Dr. Chen's legal team had been anticipating this confrontation and had prepared for it. The international legal framework that Diana had established included protections against exactly the kind of intimidation and suppression that the palace was attempting to implement. Legal documents had already been filed challenging the validity of any prosecutions brought against individuals acting to fulfill Diana's final wishes. Most significantly, James revealed that Prince William had already been contacted through secure channels and informed about his mother's backup plans. The prince's response had been immediate and decisive. He wanted to know the full truth about his mother's fears and was prepared to implement whatever protections she had established. William had authorized the activation of Diana's contingency plans and had requested a full briefing on the evidence that his mother had gathered about threats to the royal family. The revelation that Prince William was now actively involved in implementing his mother's plans changed the dynamics of the confrontation entirely. Pemberton could no longer treat this as a simple security breach by a rogue employee. The future king's direct involvement meant that any actions taken against James would be seen as attacks on the prince himself and on his mother's memory. James watched as Pemberton realized that the carefully maintained cover-up that had lasted for over 25 years was beginning to unravel. The security chief's threats became increasingly desperate as he understood that the palace's position was no longer tenable. Diana's preparations had been far more sophisticated than anyone had realized, and her son's involvement had given them a legitimacy that could not be suppressed through the usual means. The meeting ended with Pemberton demanding that James surrender all copies of Diana's document and cease all contact with external legal advisors. James refused, citing the legal protections that Diana had established and Prince William's authorization to proceed with implementing the contingency plans. He walked out of the palace that day knowing that he had crossed a line from which there could be no return. Over the following days, James found himself at the center of a rapidly escalating constitutional crisis. Palace officials attempted to discredit his claims while simultaneously trying to suppress media coverage of the story. However, Dr. Chen's legal team had anticipated these tactics and had prepared countermeasures that made suppression impossible. International media outlets began reporting on the discovery of Diana's lost will and the implications for Prince William's future. The legal proceedings that Dr. Chen had initiated in multiple countries created a complex web of international law that made it difficult for British authorities to control the narrative or suppress the evidence. Most importantly, Prince William began taking public actions that clearly indicated his support for implementing his mother's plans. He made statements about modernizing royal protocols, announced reviews of palace security procedures, and began distancing himself from some of the traditional advisors who had been in place since before his mother's death. The lost will of Princess Diana was no longer a secret document hidden in a palace wall. It had become the catalyst for a fundamental transformation of the British monarchy, one that Diana had planned and prepared for during her final months of life. Her backup plans were being implemented exactly as she had envisioned, protecting her son from the same forces that had threatened her, and ensuring that the monarchy would serve the people rather than hidden political and financial interests. James Mitchell, the security guard who had made the discovery that changed everything, found himself protected by the same international legal framework that Diana had created to protect her sons. The princess's planning had been so thorough and far-sighted that it had anticipated and prepared for every attempt at suppression or retaliation. As the fourth phase of this extraordinary story concluded, it was clear that Diana's lost will had accomplished exactly what she had intended. It had provided her son with the tools and protections necessary to transform the monarchy on his own terms, free from the corruption and manipulation that had characterized the royal establishment for decades. The final phase would determine whether these transformations could be successfully implemented or whether the forces that Diana had opposed would find new ways to reassert their control over the British crown. 6 months after James Mitchell's discovery of Princess Diana's hidden document, the British monarchy found itself in the midst of the most significant constitutional transformation in its 1,000-year history. Prince William, now armed with the full knowledge of his mother's contingency plans and the international legal protection she had established, began implementing changes that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The public revelation of Diana's loss had created a groundswell of support for royal reform that even the most conservative elements of the British establishment could not ignore. The documents detailed accounts of surveillance, manipulation, and threats had vindicated decades of public suspicion about the treatment of the people's princess and had generated overwhelming sympathy for Prince William's efforts to honor his mother's final wishes. Dr. Chen's legal team had successfully navigated the complex international proceedings that Diana had designed to protect her sons. Courts in 7 countries had recognized the validity of the contingency plans and had established legal frameworks that would ensure Prince William's safety while he implemented his mother's vision for a reformed monarchy. The international legal protections had proved so robust that even the most determined efforts at suppression had been unsuccessful. Prince William's transformation of royal protocols had been swift and decisive. Within months of learning about his mother's backup plans, he had dismissed several long-serving palace advisors who had been mentioned in Diana's document as sources of concern. He had implemented new transparency measures for royal finances, established independent oversight for palace security services, and began the process of modernizing succession laws to eliminate some of the traditional mechanisms that Diana had identified as tools for manipulation and control. Most significantly, Prince William had begun working directly with international constitutional experts to create legal safeguards that would prevent future monarchs from being subjected to the same surveillance and manipulation that had characterized his mother's final months. These safeguards included international oversight mechanisms, independent security arrangements, and legal protections that would make it impossible for government agencies to monitor royal communications without proper judicial oversight. James Mitchell found his life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The international legal protections that Diana had established had shielded him from prosecution and retaliation, but they had also thrust him into the spotlight as a key witness in the constitutional proceedings that were reshaping the monarchy. He had been relocated to a secure location and provided with round-the-clock protection while the legal processes played out. More importantly, James had become a trusted advisor to Prince William, helping to interpret his mother's documents and providing insights into the palace culture that had enabled the surveillance and manipulation that Diana had documented. His 3 decades of palace service had given him a unique perspective on the institutional problems that needed to be addressed, and his role in discovering Diana's contingency plans had earned him the prince's complete confidence. The revelation of Diana's loss had also had profound implications for Prince Harry and his relationship with the royal family. The document had contained specific provisions for protecting both sons, and Harry's decision to step back from royal duties had actually been anticipated and supported by his mother's planning. Diana had recognized that her younger son might need the freedom to pursue a different path, and she had established financial and legal arrangements that would support his independence while maintaining his connection to the family. The international media coverage of the lost discovery had created unprecedented public interest in royal reform. Opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Prince William's modernization efforts, and strong approval for his decision to implement his mother's plans. The public revelation of the surveillance and manipulation that Diana had endured had generated widespread outrage and had created political pressure for fundamental changes to the relationship between the monarchy and the security services. Perhaps most remarkably, the implementation of Diana's contingency plans had actually strengthened the monarchy rather than weakening it. By addressing the corruption and manipulation that had undermined public confidence in the royal family, Prince William had restored popular support for the institution and had positioned it as a force for positive change rather than a symbol of outdated privilege and secrecy. The legal proceedings initiated by Dr. Chen's team had also uncovered evidence of similar surveillance and manipulation activities directed at other public figures and political leaders. The investigation into Diana's treatment had exposed a broader pattern of abuse by security services and had led to parliamentary inquiries and judicial reviews that were transforming the British intelligence establishment. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton and several other palace officials mentioned in Diana's document had been forced to resign as the evidence of their activities became public. Criminal investigations were ongoing, and several former officials faced potential prosecution for their roles in the surveillance and intimidation of the royal family. The old guard that had controlled palace operations for decades had been swept away and replaced with new leadership committed to transparency and accountability. As the first anniversary of James's discovery approached, Prince William announced the establishment of the Diana Memorial Foundation for Constitutional Reform, an international organization dedicated to protecting constitutional monarchies from the corruption and manipulation that had threatened his mother. The foundation would provide legal support, oversight mechanisms, and protective services to royal families and constitutional leaders around the world. The lost will of Princess Diana had accomplished everything that she had hoped it would. Her sons were protected by international legal frameworks that made them immune to the pressure and manipulation that had characterized her own experience. The monarchy had been reformed and modernized in ways that honored her vision of service to the people rather than submission to hidden interests. Most importantly, her legacy had been preserved and protected through the very mechanisms that she had created during her final months of life. James Mitchell, the security guard whose discovery had changed the course of history, was honored by Prince William with a personal award recognizing his courage and dedication to the truth. In his acceptance speech, James reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple security patrol and had ended with the transformation of one of the world's oldest institutions. The document that Diana had hidden behind a loose panel in her study had proved to be far more than a lost will. It had been a carefully crafted plan for protecting her children and reforming the monarchy that had ultimately been implemented exactly as she had envisioned. Her fears had been validated, her preparations had proved adequate, and her vision of a modernized monarchy serving the people had been realized. As Prince William prepared to ascend to the throne under the new constitutional frameworks that his mother had helped create, it was clear that Diana's greatest legacy was not her humanitarian work or her public popularity, but the protection and transformation of the institution that she had served with such dedication. The lost will had ensured that her sons would inherit a monarchy worthy of their service and capable of serving the British people with the integrity and transparency that she had always believed it should embody. The story of the lost would become part of royal history, a testament to a mother's love and a security guard's courage, and proof that even the most powerful institutions could be transformed by the determination of individuals committed to truth and justice. Princess Diana's final gift to her sons and to the British people had been delivered 26 years after her death. But it had arrived at exactly the right time to ensure that her legacy would endure for generations to come.